barked at the prairie dogs on the screen too.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, Bella, it's okay. So their diet is kind of what got them in trouble with ranchers and farmers. And farmers did realize that the prairie dogs would eat their crops. And when ranchers came out here, they were frightened that prairie dogs would eat too much of the grass and there wouldn't be enough for their cattle. But they didn't realize that prairie dogs actually mow the grass more than just eat a ton of it. So originally there was about 40 to 80 million acres of prairie dog towns in the United States, most of which being in the Great Plains. However, when Europeans started coming out here, when they started farming and ranching, that ended up dropping to 1 to 2 million acres. And that's just due to the effort to hunt the prairie dogs and poison the prairie dogs so they wouldn't be in competition with cattle, so they wouldn't bother with crops. So now prairie dogs, although it may seem like we have a lot, only occupy about 5% of their original territory. Yeah, you may go out to the Buffalo Gap and go, oh my gosh, there's so many prairie dogs. I catch myself still thinking that today, but really, historically, they would have been all over the place. No. Yeah.
What are they good for? Do we really need that many, or is that 5% enough?
Well, they are actually essential to our grasslands.
But don't we have cows now, like you said, and cattle and other things that need the grass?
Yeah, but prairie dogs are what we consider a keystone species, meaning they affect the grassland and habitat in such a way that many different kinds of animals actually need them. So they're basically that stone that's taking the weight of everything else. If you were to remove the prairie dog, the entire grassland would basically collapse. And one of those reasons is because we do have over 200 species of plants and animals that rely on the prairie dog. Animals like bison actually love it when prairie dogs eat grass. Because prairie dogs don't necessarily eat the whole blade or the whole root system, they do just mow it. And what that does is that actually creates more room for different plant species to grow. So we actually get a more diverse grassland if we have the prairie dogs. Cattle will easily overgraze a lot if you let them. If you don't rotate them, they will sit there and they will eat that until it's all the way to the ground and we don't have any grass anymore. So prairie dogs graze in such a way that it's really great for animals like bison that are looking for more diverse grasses, more nutritious grasses even. They also create a short grass prairie. Now, it may not seem like it, but the Buffalo Gap National Grassland is what we call a mixed grass prairie. Mixed grass to short grass. So everything is going to be about yay tall or shorter. But if you guys go out and look at the prairie dog towns, the grass there is only about this high. It's definitely short. And that's great for animals like birds that want to nest on the ground. It's amazing for animals like the swift fox, which are so small. The swift fox is about the size of a house cat, that it does not live in a mixed grass or tall grass prairie. It lives for the most part in these short grass areas. So it's due to the prairie dog that we even have the swift fox out here at all. We also get burrows from these guys. And there are a lot of different animals that use these burrows. The ferrets will live in the abandoned burrows. Rabbits live in the burrows. Rattlesnakes live in the burrows. Most famously, the burrowing owl lives in the burrows. The owls are very small. They're only about this big. And they can't make the burrows themselves. In fact, the only instances where we have owls living where there aren't prairie dogs is where people actually go out and hand make the burrows themselves. There is a rancher in the greater area that does this because he likes the owls so much. So the owls especially really rely on the prairie dogs for habitat. And then of course prairie dogs are prey. There are a lot of different animals that will eat these guys. Animals like badgers, black-footed ferrets, foxes, eagles, hawks, rattlesnakes will
Everything.
actually eat the babies.
Oh.
So prairie dogs are important not just because they're prey, but because they create a more diverse grassland by mowing the grasses. They create habitats with that shortgrass prairie and those burrows. So they really do a lot for the other animals, for the other plants out here on the grasslands. But they are facing a lot of threats today. A lot of it is just people. You know, we like to move, we like to expand, so we're kind of moving into their territory. We've been hunting them, poisoning them for ages. We, of course, now like to feed them things like fruit, like Cheez-Its, stuff that they may not necessarily should be eating. And, you have your old predators as well. You have the animals like the ferret that, since the prairie dogs have been here, have been hunting them and eating them. So a lot of stuff our prairie dogs have to face today. However, the largest threat isn't actually any of these. It's actually this guy.
Ew.
You guys know what this is?
A tick?
No. It's actually
bug?
a flea.
A who?
A flea. This is a flea.
Ew.
Same
Okay,
fleas
that's
that
what
we
it
try
looks.
to protect Bella against.
Yes.
Yeah. And the reason why the flea is so dangerous is because it actually carries a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. Yersinia pestis is the same bacteria that caused the plague.
Oh my God.
The plague that killed over 50 million people in Europe is now on our grasslands, and it is killing our prairie dogs.
Wow.
Should we worry about her?
Just if you take her around any prairie dog towns.
No.
Yeah. So as long as she doesn't go into the town, she'll be fine. But yeah, the same plague that killed so many people in Europe did find its way over here, and it's been slowly making its way across the United States. California has had it for a while.
Yeah,
The
Yosemite.
ground squirrels have been affected by
Right?
it. Yeah, but it's only very recently made it out to this part of the country. And part of that has to do with the fact that because our prairie dog populations have dropped, that means they're more scattered, so it's more difficult for the plague to get there. But once it's there, it's devastating. So this is Badlands National Park, the tan. The green is the Buffalo Gap National Grassland. And this is actually where we first detected the plague on the Buffalo Gap. And that is within our Kanata Basin. And Kanata is especially worrisome to us, / special to us, because it has one of the very few self-sustaining black-footed ferret populations. So those ferrets rely on the prairie dogs for not just food, but also for habitat. So looking at it, in that same area, before 2008, we had a lot of prairie dogs. We had 31,000 acres of prairie dog town. But we did detect the plague in 2008, and since then, it's really spread. So the red is actually now the plague-infected areas within there. The yellow is the regular non-infected prairie dog towns, and the red spots are actually black-footed ferrets. So you can see it's just really taken over that entire area. And it's not just in the Kanata Basin, it's all over the Buffalo Gap now. So since 2008, our prairie dog populations have actually dropped by 70% on the Buffalo Gap. Yeah, it's insane. We get a lot of prairie dog, yeah.
Is it now listed under the Endangered Species Act, or how does that?
No, prairie dogs are a very political creature just because of the historic dislike for them.
Really?
And we do have enough out on the grasslands and across the country to where they are not technically endangered. But one day, if this stays unchecked, they will be. They will essentially be gone from here. And we would also see it affect other animal species as well. This is our swift fox. It doesn't rely solely on the prairie dogs for food, but it is one of the things it does eat. What it really needs the dogs for is that short grass prairie. So without the prairie dog, we would not really see these foxes here. since the plague was detected, we've seen our Swiftbox numbers drop. This winter, one of the Swiftbox researchers, Sarah Nevison, will actually be looking at blood samples she's been taking to see whether or not these guys are feeling the effects because they have the plague, like this fox itself has contracted the plague, or whether it's due to loss of habitat or loss of food. So she's going to be crunching the numbers this fall, and hopefully we'll get a good look at what is happening with these guys. We also have researchers looking at our burrowing owls. And from what we can tell right now, the population has stayed steady, but that is something to where once the prairie dogs are gone, no one will be there to make them burrows anymore. That grass will grow to be too high for the owls, and they will eventually either disappear or become very threatened here on the grassland. And we've seen the biggest impact on our black-footed ferrets. These guys do rely solely on the prairie dog for everything. So since that plague came here, we've seen our ferrets drop in population as well. So what would a world without prairie dogs look like? I'm going to tell you, it would be pretty bleak. They may seem pretty insignificant, but they do affect the world in a big way. We do have tons of plants and animals that need the prairie dog to survive. Over 200 of them. You would get a completely different ecosystem, a completely different grassland, and you would never get to go out to a prairie dog town and listen to them and see them do their jump yips and see how they interact. These guys are a very uniquely social creature. There are very few animals like the prairie dog out there as far as communication systems go. So you wouldn't be able to share that with your kids, your grandkids, their great-grandkids. They would be gone, which is pretty horrifying. This is pretty close to the face I made when I first heard from our wild biologists that our populations dropped by 70%. I was like, you joshing me? 70, are you sure? He's like, yeah, pretty sure. It might even be a conservative number too. Yeah, pretty horrifying. But we are trying to help the prairie dogs. We're trying to help make sure that this doesn't happen. My job is to educate, but our wildlife crew actually gets to go out and get hands-on with helping the prairie dogs. And one of the ways that they do this is actually by capturing the prairie dogs. So every year they will go out with a team of volunteers and they will catch the prairie dogs, count the prairie dogs, and then scan them to see if they've been tagged. If they haven't, they will tag the prairie dogs along with take some blood work as well. And they just microchip them like we do with our pets now. Yep. Once they're done tagging, they release them back into the wild, and then we get proactive. So we don't just count the prairie dogs, the wildlife management team also dusts the prairie dog towns. And what I mean by dusting is that they actually take a powdered form of a chemical that's very similar to frontline, and they spread it around the burrow openings. That way when the prairie dogs go in and come out, they get that dust on themselves and it kills the fleas.
Good, yay.
The fleas that spread the plague. So that is one of the ways that we are being very proactive here on the grasslands. However, Mother Nature has a way of kicking us when we're down, and the fleas are now becoming resistant to the dust. Yeah, so that's not very good. And that means that our next best hope is no longer dusting, but actually vaccinating. So there is a vaccine that's being put together right now. It's being studied. In a few years, it should be out on the market. And the idea is that we would actually take something very similar to a dog treat that has the vaccine within it. You would place it amongst the prairie dog colonies. The prairie dogs come up, they eat it, and they're vaccinated for about 9 months. 9 months may not seem like a long time, but it's enough to give us an edge over the plague, and it's hopefully one of those things where because we only vaccinate for 9 months, you know, if a prairie dog happens to eat 2 of the vaccines, it doesn't become really sick. So that happy middle. This has gone so far into research and production and the process that scientists have now figured out the favorite flavor of prairie dogs. You guys want to take any guess as to what that favorite flavor
Cherry, maybe,
is?
a strawberry.
Cherry or strawberry? Any other guesses?
Raspberry, blueberry.
Some sort of berry?
Chocolate.
Chocolate?
Chocolate.
What's your guess?
Red grass flavored something.
It's actually peanut butter.
Ew, yes, makes sense.
Yeah, so prairie dogs have great taste.
Good for them.
So yeah, it's gotten to that point where we now also know the favorite flavor. So hopefully in 3 years we'll get the okay to get this out in production. We'll be making this, and then we can go and we can vaccinate our prairie dogs. But there is something you guys can do as well to help the prairie dogs. And very simply, it's you can just start by visiting the prairie dogs, by learning about the prairie dogs, and then also spreading the word. That's perhaps the biggest thing you can do. Let people know why prairie dogs are important. Let them know perhaps maybe they shouldn't walk right up to a prairie dog, but leave the prairie dog some space because of that play. But really, we want folks to know why these guys are so important to the grasslands, to the prairie. If you really feel the need to, or you feel driven to, you can donate or volunteer. There are a lot of societies and organizations out there that are looking for volunteers, people to help them go out, capture prairie dogs, count prairie dogs, study prairie dogs. And of course, if you ever want to learn more, I highly recommend our bookstore. We have a couple of kids' books for prairie dogs, and while that may seem like kind of off-putting, kids' books, why are you recommending a kids' book to me? It's because they're actually a wealth of information, and they're put into a form that most folks find easy to understand, unlike the one book our wildlife biologist gave me, where I open it up and I'm like, what is all this? I have no idea what it's talking about. So they are a wealth of information. We also do have an exhibit hall you can walk around. We have a great video of a prairie dog and a ferret squaring off against each other. You can see some of the animals that rely on the prairie dogs. And then you can watch our general video or talk to one of us. Talk to one of the park rangers here. If you're very interested, you can always go next door to the district and ask if there's a wildlife biologist around, and you can talk to them. Tony is a great guy, very friendly, wealth of knowledge. So there are things you can do to help the prairie dogs. So is this guy actually important? It's quiz time. What do you guys say? Yes? Yes? Awesome,
Yes.
you're correct. You passed. These guys are important. These prairie dogs, although they may seem silly, they may seem small, affect the grassland in a humongous way. They are the key to a healthy grassland. So does anyone have any questions?
What is their home like on the ground? You mentioned they go down to chamber, they can, if they, isn't it an intruder? But what else is beyond that?
Oh, let's see, nesting rooms or nurseries, I guess is what they're actually called. And that's just specifically for mom and the babies. When the prairie dogs are first born, they're naked, they're blind. They have to stay underground for about 2 to 3 weeks before they're actually big enough to go out and explore. So there's one room specifically that's the nursery, and then there's a couple of other just side rooms as well for where you would stay or where some of your family members would stay. But because they are so territorial, the burrows aren't actually linked to other neighboring prairie dog families. It's just your family.
Do they have 1 or 2 entrances to there?
It's up to them.
Oh, okay.
One is easier to defend, but every once in a while you see 2. Anything else? Well, you guys are free to go out and explore the grasslands. If you are interested in knowing where you can see a few prairie dogs, I highly recommend Sage Creek Road within Badlands National Park. That's one of the easiest prairie dog towns to get to. Every time I drive to my Sage Creek program, I'm always having to slam on the brakes
Yep.
in order to not hit at least one prairie dog.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you. Bravo.
Anything else you guys think of, just grab me.